Hey everybody! All right, I think we're live. Welcome everyone. This is our April live show, and we're just coming to you to talk about what's going on the channel. We'll talk a little bit about what we're putting forward. Recently, last week we just recorded a show that should come up shortly, so we'll go into that a little bit, and then just kind of catch up and see what's going on in our lives. So, how's it going, Shane? We caught him eating. We're not letting him talk without having a mouthful of food. It's Triscuits and cheese, I think, and a beer. That is the Thursday night for sure. We got Mr. Boyce,
Howdy.
and yeah, the Michaels are here. So
Eminem, melt your hand, not your mouth.
very nice.
Or is it your mouth, not your hand? I don't remember.
Absolutely. Yep. And they tend to get busier, the weather is getting nicer. There's a little more sunlight, so for people that live, further south, I wasn't prepared when I lived in like Florida, California, places like that. Not that I remember California too well, but just how drastic the difference in sunlight is throughout the year. And here, there are times, especially since we're in the Northwest, which is known. We have some of the only rainforests I'm aware of in the United States. Like the amount of rain here is real. It is a struggle. And so with those overcast skies, I think some days like by 3 o'clock, it's getting like you have your headlights on outside, even without rain. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's daylight like forever. It's like 6:30 and it's still light out. Yeah.
We're starting to get, real light as opposed to what I call false light, where you walk outside and you're like, oh, hey, it's sunny, but why is it cold? There's no heat. And now you're like, oh, it's sunny. Oh, hey, there's warmth coming from the sun. This is nice.
Absolutely. Here in the Northwest, t-shirt weather for us is, what would you guys say, like 50 degrees? 55 degrees? It's definitely t-shirt weather. Yeah. 60 degrees, it's like full on shorts. I'm like, I got my AC on in my car. I had my AC on today. It was sunny. Exactly, yeah. It's summer. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, my mouse is in the way. Mm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. 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 Well, yeah. They've been stored in refrigerators for a long time and driven in trucks. Hmm. Yeah. You know. Oh man. A good nectarine is like a carnal experience. You know, you're like it's offensively sweet in a good way somehow. Like you need to be in a state of mind, and your face is like wet and dripping. It's you know it's dirty, and it's wonderful, and I miss it. So I love those Rainier cherries too. That's one of those things that pop up that I mean it's just such a treat. Um, and now that I have my son who just devours fruit like Cookie Monster, you know, he's got a problem. It's great. I mean, I forget that we live in like a fruit capital of our country. Um, yeah, yeah. I think yeah. Didn't like our colleges get two different cherries to have sex and create a super cherry? That's my basic understanding of horticulture in motion. Yeah. Mm-hmm. There's a lot there. I gotta make a pie. I gotta make a pie this year with Rainier cherries. I've never tried that, so I don't make a lot of cherry pie. So yeah, yeah, yeah. There's a texture difference. Yeah, you just don't want to eat those. Yeah. There's the most famous. Yeah, yeah, thickener because they're very juicy. So I worry about yeah, yeah, yeah. It's a definitely a good challenge to see what happens because I don't know. I mean, it's a particularly Northwest thing to have our Rainier cherries. I mean, we're also kind of the apple capital in a lot of ways, and then the county I live in is yeah, it's a huge berry producer. Yeah, and I mean, I have a good friend who like lives in the middle of raspberry fields, and I'm trying to see the robot vehicles that like harvest the raspberries because a lot of those places are done with machines now, which obviously makes a lot of sense. I can't. I mean, I had to pick raspberries, but yeah, I want to see them because apparently they're like 8 feet tall. They go over a whole row. Anyways, yeah, I mean, we're getting in. So for pagans right now, we're getting into Beltane. We've got just a week away. Yeah, this weekend we're Walking Pagans is gonna be doing their Beltane, which is actually being done, bless you, by my coven this year. So I have a big part in that one, and then May 1st is formally Beltane. So we've got a great from our last year we did a Beltane episode that I want to make sure is up on the new host, and we'll get it up on YouTube here because it's already prepared. Exactly. Hey, it's all still relevant. But, I mean, I think I'm looking forward to that for sure. I'm probably going to have Emmerich again just in the apartment complex I live in. There's some older people, and last year he did it, but he wasn't, he was 3, so he wasn't really sure of what to do. But we made little bags of flowers in them, and he would put them on the door and then knock on the door and run away and hide.
Oh.
Except last year he jumped out, and he's like, those are yours. And then he'd like hide again, or he'd be like, you, because he didn't have a lot of words even back then. Now he can actually speak to them. Although he's supposed to hide, not get caught, but, it should be fun. So, Mr. Boyce, let's just jump into we just uploaded a crystal video.
Video number 1.
Well, pretty excited about that. Do you want to talk about it a little bit?
Yeah. So, it's a video all about how to use your amethyst crystals in a spiritual context. Because, there's videos for days and days and days and weeks and years out there for, what is an amethyst crystal and what are its properties and so on and so forth. But there's not a lot of content for, how do you make use of it? And even then, it's, they're okay. It's maybe take a bath with it. Where it's you could do this or that. But if you're trying to live your life in a spiritual way and you're doing spiritual things, and you got these rocks that give off these spiritual vibrations, let's make use of that, right? Let's amplify. Let's actually do something with this instead of having it up on a bookshelf somewhere. Why not grab it and use it with you?
Absolutely, and I think that's, I know a lot of people that collect crystals. Being pagan, it seems like everybody does, and people have various levels of meaning they ascribe to their crystal practice. Let's put it. For some people, it's really important and life-changing. To other people, they're I don't know what they do, but they look really nice, and I like to own them. And kind of in that spectrum, there's always this wonder if some people just buy them and they just have no idea what's going on, and they're well, look at that. That's beautiful. And they set it up, and they're that's a really nice crystal. I have no idea what to do with that. And it's fun to... Yeah, and... Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's a fun thing.
It's so funny. I had my Reiki teachers were a husband and wife combo, and we were talking about, kind of setting the location and clearing the location, making it comfortable for people coming in. And the wife was and you can put crystals around, it brings in a good energy, it makes things so pretty. And the husband was just I never think about that. I get the biggest crystal I can to move the most energy I can, and I stick it right here. And that was so funny. I was yes, let's get some vibes going. Let's make some movement.
Mm-hmm. I mean, on a personal note, it's always I'm pretty skeptical when it comes to a lot of things that fit outside the paradigm of the like kind of a cult tree of life. You'd almost say Kabbalistic, although it's part of a network that runs through a lot of different disciplines like astrology, astronomy, you know, as far as like planetary movements in real life, and then planetary movements in modern times which don't actually fit with astrology, and tarot and all those things. But I definitely have no. I mean, if you look at crystals from a purely scientific lens, they're the most interesting things, and it has to do with this high level of order that is naturally present in the the lattice of chemicals and molecules that grow in a certain way, and they imbue a crystal with properties that are the closest thing to magical, like that you can point to, in my opinion, in a material sense like that. You know, we're not talking about the abstract feeling that you feel when you see your own child be born, or you know, like what love is deeply and philosophically, and you know, we're talking about like crystals that you squeeze and they make electricity. We're talking about ones that just give off static electricity, like amber, you know, which is like tree resin that's hardened and polymerized over. I really butchered that word, polymerized over thousands of years, and it's gone from like copal that we burn, millions, or Carl Sagan, millions of billions of years. I think that's what he used to say. Anyways, and they do things like run our watches. You know, they create, because you put things in an electrical field like quartz, and they vibrate in a certain way that you can use to keep time to, you know. And I mean, these are real things that are magical. Some you heat up, they make electricity. Some you compress, and I mean, it's just amazing. And it comes from the fact that it is a bunch of molecules and chemicals that have grown and have a high level of order that reminds me so much as an analog, a mineral analog to natural life. Because in so many ways that's exactly what we are, you know. And so they're like, I this sounds really out there, but I think of them as like the cousins of life or something, like the earth literally giving up. It's like creating its own material to mimic life itself out of itself. It's amazing, and I love studying them, and like what makes a diamond different than quartz. You know, like many of them look identical. If you look at a Herkimer diamond, which is not a diamond at all, it's a type of quartz that grows like a perfectly cut diamond. And you're like, this is the most amazing thing. And you know, you wonder, before people were testing things on like Mohs scales and stuff like that, what would you value more, you know, like a rough diamond, or and there's so much illusory value that we put into them already, right? Like, people think it might be ridiculous to think, well, this makes me feel calmer or helps me feel more energetic. And at the same time, they're like, diamonds mean love, and I'm going to spend $500,000 on this one, you know? Like, that's ridiculous. You know, an emerald is like, you know, like, what are the flaws and inclusions in this? Is this a lab emerald? Is this a real emerald? Like, and we put so much value in that, yet the idea that these stones could affect us in any meaningful way based on what they are is laughable to many people, you know, who will, of course, certainly, and the marketing around them, right? I mean, yeah. I mean, Marilyn Monroe made an entire movie about diamonds, you know, and diamonds are a girl's best friend, right?
Moulin Rouge, that's what they say.
And it's just, it's such a part of our culture, whether you believe it or not. You know a person with a diamond ring. You know what they've got going on.
Oh, it's an instant, class identifier, right?
Mm-hmm.
You see someone with a rock that big on their ring, and there's like 3 of them, and you're just like, okay, you're like middle upper class or straight rich. Like, you see somebody with the little silicone bands, and you're like, okay, like,
you're
a normal person. Yeah.
And why is a diamond worth so much more than an emerald or alexandrite? I mean, alexandrite doesn't have, to be fair, the name is totally lacking. Not to put down the name Alexander. I'm sure it's a fantastic name.
You could say it's a great name.
You could say that. But, you know, it's alexandrite. For those that don't know, you've got a stone. It's actually pretty high on the Mohs scale as far as I know. Obviously not as high as diamond. I realize nothing is. But it changes color in different types of light. And I've noticed it even throughout the day. But yeah, moving into a home or a building, moving out, it's a different color. It's beautiful. It cuts very nicely. Good cleavage, all that. Yet, you know, it's compared to a diamond, it's pretty much valueless. And diamonds are generally clear, pretty uninteresting. They look just like quartz. You couldn't tell them apart without testing them. Well, you know, there's some people that probably could, like jewel smiths and stuff. Yeah. And it's only because of the rarity, or at least we're led to believe. Because mm-hmm. 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 Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. They've got and because it's such a hard material, you know, again, it's like a lattice work of molecules that has this, to where if you had a perfect diamond that was a spaceship, it's a beautiful concept. I mean, there's and yeah, I definitely encourage people to kind of spend time with stones, and it's okay to buy them because they look good. Do we want to touch on the darker aspect of the stone market? I mean, I think it's worth saying.
Absolutely. Let's do it.
Mm-hmm. No, it wasn't just Leonardo DiCaprio that brought that to our attention. It's a real problem. And it's not diamonds. It's not just diamonds. I mean, there are people in mines all over the world that are not making a real living and basically slaves working in these underground mines. And I think, it's I don't want to downplay the fact that there are tons of children right now mining cobalt and getting poisoned and working for almost no money that keep our electronics working at the same time. Like, that is not more okay because it's more useful. And I think we do that. Like, well, computers are very important, so we got to keep those going. So get those children in there. Or most people are just unaware of it, I think, in a lot of cases, like where cobalt comes from. But it seems especially egregious when somebody's risking their lives or their children's lives and being forced into slavery over something that is a bauble for people much higher on the economic scale than they are. And
Like, let it be that one, right? Let it be the children's slave labor. Like, let the robots take that job.
mm-hmm. Yeah. No. And this yeah. Let them get the cobalt. They need it.
It's
for
the
life.
The gingerbread man thing, where it's like the gingerbread man stands in his gingerbread house and knows not if he's made of house or if the house is made of him, so he screams. It's the same thing. The little robot drilling for the minerals. It's like, wait a minute.
I am the minerals. No, certainly. And this is a problem in many areas of spiritual materialism. Like, even where your incense comes from is worth looking up and saying, like, I love this Palo Santo stuff. This is really great. I'm going to burn it all day. And then you're like, oh, the trees are endangered. Oh, man. Like, that sucks. Like, maybe I shouldn't burn this stuff. Not to mention the like cultural impact that it can have on people. Definitely just the pure, like getting dragon's blood, like did people that are dying, or slaves like harvest this, what's going on with the trees where it comes from. And that definitely applies to crystals and the impact that mining them has on their ecosystem and how it's being done. I know there's a push, and I won't get too deep into it because I never really believe very deeply in many of these things unless I know better, unless I've seen pictures and like people have done real reporting on this kind of thing, journalistic work. But I know there's a push to have these like ecologically sound mining practices and fair trade crystal, you could say, something like that. There's no regulation on a lot of that stuff, so take it with a grain of salt would be my advice. Don't just assume. Look into the companies a little bit and see who they are and where they source from and things like that, and you'll probably get closer to the truth. But definitely not all diamonds and crystal. Not all crystals are taken from these like really dark kind of things that you need to be scared of, but you're never going to know the difference unless you look it up, and some of them, like a good agate if you're in the Northwest like we are, basically the West Coast, I mean, from Oregon to Washington, you can walk up and down the beach and find yourself agates. Like, you don't have to buy them in a store. So, Herkimer diamonds, I think if you live in New York, there are places you can find them on the ground in that state. Same, and so, I mean, it goes on. I'm not going to name every mineral out there that I know of, and there's 100 I don't know of on top of that, but do some research if you're buying some of these things, and put some thought and intention into where they come from. Do either of you guys have any tips on that front that you personally look into?
I just say always clear your crystals. Always.
Oh yeah,
Just
yeah.
like-
Energetically speaking,
Even if it came from a good place, like maybe the last person who owned it just had terrible energy, or was an abusive POS to everybody around them, like, and the energy was just there soaking it up. So you don't know, like, clear that energy, man. Clear it.
yeah. Mr. Boyce is speaking to the practice of energetically cleansing your magical items. For people in the pagan community, they'll know all about that. For people in other different disciplines that might not know as much, this is the idea of like cleansing it. Okay, so if you watch Ghost Hunters, then
This was a strong right turn. I'm listening. What's up?
well, I think, don't they go on about like cleansing a home of its negativity and stuff in there? Isn't that like a big aspect of like the idea of negative energy being harnessed in a place and affecting people? That idea of like, was there a murder here? And I think that's something that's universal. They've done studies where they're like, what do you think of this sweater? Rate it from 1 to 10. And they're like, well, I like the sweater. And then they're like, would it change your opinion if I told you Ted Bundy owned this sweater? And you're like, I hate this sweater. I never want to see this sweater again. It's like, the sweater's been washed. There's no nothing on it. Yeah, how do you feel about it? And you're like, I still hate the sweater. And so I think we all have an innate idea of negative energy, right? Yeah. And pretty much everybody believes in it. I don't want to be around it. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. There doesn't need to be any real Ted Bundy DNA on the sweater for that sweater to be something you don't want in your home. You don't want to like take pictures of your son wearing the oversized Ted Bundy sweater, and you're like, that's so cute. Instead, it's slightly horrifying. So
Hopefully. I'm just thinking like the 1% of viewers out there that are like, oh no, I'd totally be into that. That'd be great.
well, that's a different kind of thing, but often related, weirdly enough. And I mean, that's a darker side of the occult, right? Like, that goes back to people that are obsessed with Hitler and build little shrines to him in their home, and people that love serial killer energy. I mean, that's the weirdest thing to me to this day, but I guess I don't want to yuck people's yum. I don't know if that's the right term to use. So yeah. Yeah. Sure. I mean, again, I don't want to yuck anybody's yum. But I will say that there's an aspect of rebellion to things like that come from knowing it's not something you should do, and that having its own kind of power in the psyche and in the culture, that will attract some people because it detracts so many other people, and that's why you see things like Satanism become really big. And some would argue that Satanism has its place in that sense. I think many people that are very into the idea of like religious freedom and stuff, or actually even into the the anti-Christian stuff, that when you see people like say, I'm going to put up a big list of the 10 Commandments or something, in this public government space, and then the Church of Satan comes in and they're like, yeah, and we're going to build a Baphomet, a giant devil with breasts, like with horns, sitting right here, and that's our religious freedom. And then you're like, there's a place for that, of rebellion, to say, well, am I saying it's okay because it's something I support? Because I don't support a giant Baphomet in my kid's school, so why would I support like the 10 Commandments or a big Jesus statue or something in the same place? And it is ideologically very similar, you can see that. So, I think there's a usefulness that comes in our culture. I'm not a Satanist. I know a few, but yeah, no, especially, yeah. Well, and I mean, I probably shouldn't even say this like on live YouTube, but those people are largely the same people. They won't always tell you that, and because there's political reasons to separate the two. But the Church of Satan actually ascribes to a lot of like occult philosophy and ritual, and they do it pretty regularly, although it's definitely seen as a liberating function rather than a form of worship. And so, yeah, saying they worship Satan is different than people have in mind, especially coming from a Christian perspective on what you would think it means to worship Satan. So we'll just say it's more complicated than that. I totally understand that there's a strong what you would call anti-religious, or I can't believe this word is escaping me, but if you guys could help me, what is the word for
atheist?
Atheist, thank you. Although atheist, right, is a term that can be applied to all kinds of modalities of belief. So in a lot of ways, all pagan people would kind of be considered atheists because they don't believe in like the one true God. They're not theists, right? So yeah, historically, Christians would call pretty much anybody that wasn't Christian in some way, meaning part of like Eastern Orthodox, Catholic, Protestant, anybody who wasn't one of those people would probably be atheist, right? Depending on how you're using the term. We have a more broad definition of what that means, and generally we ascribe it to people who don't believe in, we imagine it applies to people that don't believe in any kind of God. Exactly, and it's safe to say that's, that applies that way. But again, can be problematic if you're like having a conversation with somebody, as so many things are. Words are not that precise, and so if somebody labels someone as an atheist, or you're reading a book where somebody did 300 years ago, and then you find out they're probably like agnostic or something in the modern sense. All right. I think my son is beating at the door, everyone. So
Words are such just a limited medium, unfortunately, especially in the spiritual realm, where it's like, how do I vocalize this experience that I've had and make it sound intelligible?
yeah,
Like, it's a struggle. The struggle's real, for sure.
especially when there's so much like contextual baggage with a lot of words.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so if you're talking about something like invocation, if you're talking to a Christian about invocation as maybe a tantricist or a Wiccan or something, there's a level of horror to it because, you know, they're thinking like possession and the exorcist and, you know, throwing up green pea soup and walking on the ceiling, because that's all been like applied to these ideas of like bringing spirits into the self. Shane was talking about worshiping Satan, you know, that's got a million layers of, you know, contextual baggage there. Or, you know, we'll just say that it definitely invites a lot of imaginative, you know, pictures in the mind that may not be applied at all. That may not be implied, I should say. So, I do. Spiritual language is something that's really lacking in American culture, and sometimes I wonder if we used more like Sanskrit terms and things like that. And I already have to think that other languages have more words that can be applied, simply because if I'm talking to another occultist and I don't have the words in English to use, you find things like Sanskrit terms coming up quite a bit, or names in other religions to describe mostly the same thing, you know, so for a good example, if you're talking about like the tattvas or something, there's things like akasha, where akasha has a meaning. It's not easily explained without many sentences in English. But if you say something is like akashic, it is already a term that has a lot of meaning for some people, that they know what you're talking about. And so I think that's really interesting. And I wonder if, 100 years from now, if we'll have more flexibility when it comes to describing spiritual experiences, because it matters. I mean, it really does. Like, I train people, I teach classes in paganism, and so much of it is, I feel like I'm teaching them, it's like reading music or something, where it's like, you've got to learn an entire system to be able to take a spiritual truth and explain it to somebody else in a way that they can repeat it or understand it even. So much of it is just giving language to things that, and it takes years. It takes years just to get there.
I mean, that's a poet's whole career, right?
Yeah.
It's how do I put words to feelings and experiences so that other people can understand.
Mm-hmm.
And even then, they have to read it and then, devote an immense amount of time to digging between the lines and trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
And it works for an art form, as Shane would know, with his master's in poetry degree. It works really well for an art form. You can say so much in so little space, as long as the person's willing to look very deeply into what you've written and understand it in these different ways, it's hard when it's like you're trying to create a precise language that's more like a science, you know, in the sense that, you know, you're trying to be very specific about things. And, you know, both of you and myself have spent years of our life trying to become more fluent in that language. And part of the show is really bringing that language to everybody out there, because I think terms get thrown around all the time and we find ourselves wondering, you know, what they mean. We've all had to learn at some point.
Oh, entirely. Just, you know, having conversations with other people and they'll throw up the term black magic.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, you said that in a positive context. What's that mean to you? Because to my understanding, like, that's a pretty bad thing. Like, what are we talking about here?
For people that have been part of paganism for a while, you'll hear the left-hand path and the right-hand path, right? And you're like, what does that mean? You know, I've had a lot of people ask me, you know, almost in like hushed tones, like, is this part of the left-hand path? You know, and you're like, oh yeah, we should probably talk about those things, you know, these concepts and what it means, you know, because it means different things in different contexts. It definitely depends on where you're coming from in your tradition and, you know, things like that, which is super important. I really hope that part of what we do on our show is dig a little deeper into those things, and even explore it in other cultures that overlap with ours. Like Buddhism is becoming really popular in the United States. It has been for 100 years. And, you know, when people talk about the lesser vehicle or, you know, the greater vehicle, you know, and you're like, like a car? Like, yeah, am I driving the vehicle? Am I in the vehicle? Is Buddhism the vehicle?
I laugh because I know nothing about Buddhism. So as you're saying that, I'm like, okay, vehicle in the sense of like something that transports something, like a body, a car. Like I have no idea what you're talking about, and you just called me out right there.
Oh, that's cool. Shane and I we'll dive into a kind of a primer for Buddhism, and that's the thing. Like our goal isn't going to be to make everybody into Buddhists. Yeah, certainly. No, and I've practiced with some Buddhas. I've practiced with some Buddhists. I've read a lot of like material and things like that, and I took a college course on Buddhism, basically, specifically. It touched on a few other Eastern religions, but a lot of the class, as you can imagine, was spent on Buddhism, taught by a Buddhist. But having said that, you know, there's so much out there that you can barely touch on. Even a few months of somebody telling you, you know, 3 days a week for hours what Buddhism is, by the end of it, you know, you're not an expert. Let's be honest. You're nowhere near. But you know enough about it to have a conversation about it with a Buddhist. And have an idea if somebody's like a New World Buddha, you know, what do they call it?
New Age?
Not New Age. That's something different.
You're like, different segment, we'll get there.
Yeah, definitely. There's a kind of Christian-inspired version of Buddhism that's becoming very popular all over the East, you could say. So we'll go into all that. Yeah. I guess I mean the Far East, because it's really broad, right? I mean, you're talking like India and China, and actually there's a decent amount in, Japan. You know, it's a huge area that's, you know, you find Buddhists in former Soviet republics and stuff. So it's Buddhism's everywhere, and being able to talk about it in a way that makes sense, or understanding, what's the difference between like the Dalai Lama and the Beatles and their teacher. Was he a Buddhist? Because I've heard Buddhist words used, and you're like, well, he was not a Buddhist, but I don't think everybody knows the difference. Yeah, well, exactly, because of the crossover you get with Eastern mystics that came out of India, and some of those people that traveled to like Nepal and spread, and then you ended up with Mahayana Buddhists and stuff, and you ended up with Buddhists that practiced a more like indigenous version of Buddhism that was full of things like wizards and stuff that you don't get in Zen Buddhism, right? There's not many Zen Buddhist wizards. It does sound cool. It does sound cool. And
can I use that as the class for my next D&D character?
But definitely coming from some of these places like Nepal, there were characters, like called like the mad yogis and stuff who spread religion out there, spread tantric Buddhism and stuff, or helped create a hybrid of tantra and Buddhism that is related to what you'll find like practiced in those areas, related to the Dalai Lama and stuff. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's such an interesting topic, just about people in general. Because, you could be talking about religion on one hand, or martial arts on the other hand, and what you're describing is exactly the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Where you're getting these cultures meeting, and they're sharing ideas, and they're intermingling, and they're creating something new, and that passes on, and then you have people that are like, oh, this is really cool, but what about the original shit?
Mm-hmm.
And like,
there's
there's this idea that because it's old, like, it's better, but like, is it better? Like, I don't know. Yep.
Yeah. There'll be people that studied both disciplines. Mm-hmm. It
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, we put labels and categorize things as if that like separates them from each other. But in real life, people and ideas are constantly rubbing up against each other and exchanging places. And when things are close enough, just like when you've got two organisms genetically close enough to breed and make offspring, you're going to end up with these schools of thought that still understand each other, even through all the time and the space that's between them. And once they can read each other's material, it'll inspire them to create all new content and go in all new directions. And that's how ideas work, and that's how culture works.
And that, boys and girls, is how you get the platypus.
Yeah. That looked like animals that aren't related enough to breed together, but they did anyways. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes, queen. Yeah, it's yes, queen. Um, yeah. It would. I mean, one of the things I love to look into is the ways in which the British blame us for butchering English, but they were actually British words to begin with that we just picked up, and so they're blaming us for things that they created, and they just don't even realize it anymore because it's been like complaining that we use the word soccer. Americans didn't make up the word soccer. We got it from the British. They just stopped using it. And now they blame us for it. And the Australians, I think they also use soccer. It's like, you guys did that. And to be fair, aluminium is not spelt that way. It just isn't. Where'd you get those syllables? I never saw them. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, you've got people using words like yoga in a normal household, right? With no spiritual connotation whatsoever. So they think that it originally meant to yoke an animal, to like put a thing around the animal's neck so you could ride on it or use it for work. That's what I've heard. Exactly. Then it became a spiritual practice of controlling and conquering the self and the body, right? And then it became exercise. Go ahead. Oh, but then you had it merged with like British calisthenics because the people that spoke that language that used the word yoga as yoke moved to India and Great Britain, and then those people came back into contact at, 2,000 years later, 3,000 years later, who knows, and British calisthenics merged with yoga, and it became the kind of gym yoga that we're familiar with today that you do to keep your body healthy and limber, and like it works really well for that. Maybe it you do some breathing and stuff that goes along with it, and so you get people in the United States talking about how they have to go to their yoga practice or do more yoga, because they're feeling stiff and it's not even a religious word again, but now you're getting people that do that kind of yoga that maybe they find that new age community and realize that yoga was a spiritual practice and want to get back into that because they already practice it. No. Well, I know some gyms that it has. Certainly, yes. Mm-hmm. I did yoga for dummies. Yeah, they're still the originals. Yeah. Well, and here's how I think they merged. Remember when we were in like middle school and we were doing the warm up stretching exercises, And some of them were yoga poses. Some of them are actually yoga poses with names that were like taught by probably Patanjali, way back when. I think that they got their way into our middle school through that British calisthenics. It was part of that, I'm going to limber up for my physical activity, do this series of, active stretches that started to include stretches that they saw in yoga from India. That's how I think that it happened. And they didn't call it yoga often, but you still do have middle schoolers doing yoga poses, even if they never use the term, just in their different stretches. So it's got to exist, right? Well, especially we've been following Tantra a bit, and they talk about how the idea behind yoga as a path to enlightenment is that some people, this is my understanding, and it's not complete by any means, so feel free to jump in, or if anybody listening knows better, I'm sure somebody will hear it and will. But there is an idea that it can happen spontaneously through the physical act of yoga, even without the mental component of the spiritual aspect of it. And so by doing enough yoga physically, I think that there was an understanding, at least in some point in the history of yoga, that just doing it could facilitate an awakening of consciousness without anything else. Mm-hmm. 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 Like the microdosing stuff. Mm-hmm. At some point, well, we've got to go more into yoga. We've got to hit up the Kundalini and talk about that a bit in an episode. We've got so many places to go. But we're already over time. Anything anybody wants to throw in to kind of carry it home?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, cool. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I'm sad I'm missing that conversation. That sounds really interesting.
Oh, wow. Yep. I'm excited. I've started making a list of presents already. Yeah, like Shane's personal Santa Claus. And I'll just hurl them out while I've had too much wine and festivities are at their height. It'll be great. They will be. They will
Don't throw those so they're heavy.
Might hurt somebody. Well, thank you so much, everyone. Just another great conversation here at Everyday Sacred. Please join in and leave comments whenever you find this, and we'll be keeping an eye out and keep more content coming your way. Well, thank you very much.